Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We'll just let a few more participants enter and we will kickstart our webinar, step-by-step guide to millisecond latency, full stack apps on JSON and JSON data. Thanks, Alex, for joining. Thanks, Akmal, for joining. Most of you guys might know Alex and Akmal. They both have been regular speakers here at our webinars. So Akmal is here to take care of all the questions that you guys might have. So stay tuned for that. And so, yeah, we'll kickstart the webinar. So before doing that, I would like to announce certain future sessions that we are going to present later this week and uh, the next week as well. So I'm so sorry. That date is wrong. That's supposed to be on September 20th. So it's called Say How to Use SingleStore for Order Scaling. And on tomorrow, we have Intro to Vectors. It's a pretty hands-on session with Akmal. And it's very beginner friendly. And I think we can also take care of certain people that are at an intermediate level. And on September 13th, we have LLMs in fraud detection. Again, it's with Akmal. So Akmal has had a very busy schedule. So it's very graciously agreed to do these two webinars with us. So thanks for that. We really appreciate it. And I'm very sure that the people attending also really appreciate it. And after a long time, we have had a chance to do the webinar with Alex. So thanks, Alex, for joining. So moving on, I would like to announce the raffle for today. So I will be putting the links to everything in the chat as well. So feel free to access those when you have the chance. So anyone who tries out SingleStore's tutorial today will be entered for a chance to win either branded new AirPods or Meta's new Ray-Ban LLM smart glasses. Simply click the link or scan the QR code that's present on your screen, and you will be taken to a landing page for a free trial. Just try out the features and we'll announce the winner by the end of today's session. So, and one more winner by the end of the day. We highly encourage you to load in the data. I will be putting the link to Alex's notebook in the chat. So, feel free to try it and let me know what's your experience. If any of these topics are interesting to you, feel free to connect with anyone on the team and drop in a message regarding any feedback, queries, questions. And during the session, or maybe during the end of the session, we are going to have the Q&A session with and you can use the Zoom Q&A button, which is present at the bottom of your console. Just remember that we will not be answering any anonymous questions or any uh, any questions that will not be taken up online. We will make sure that our team follows up with you afterwards via the session. So because we have an internal mission statement to try to answer 100% of the audience questions. So moving on, allow me to announce today's speakers. So we have Alex, who is a growth engineer here at SingleStore and has been phenomenal in designing solutions, coming up with content for these webinars and different use cases and how they can be integrated with SingleStore to solve enterprise level queries. So thanks, Alex, for joining, taking out the time for us. And thanks everyone for joining. Alex, please take it away. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Yukti. And thanks everyone for joining us here today. I know it is morning Pacific time, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone watching. I know we have people watching from probably all over the world. Today, we're going to be talking about how to use SingleStore to power millisecond latency JSON applications. And to dive into that, to start with that, we really have to talk about JSON first. And so probably for most of you, because you came to this webinar about JSON data, you're already familiar with JSON as a data format, but just to introduce everyone else who's unfamiliar, JSON is a data format. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it powers a lot of really diverse use cases, everything from IoT to financial services, real-time recommendations. And that's because it's a really flexible data structure. That means that compared to traditional relational data, JSON, which kind of falls under this umbrella of NoSQL, allows you to be really flexible with the properties that you associate with the objects that you end up storing. So instead of having an author table, which is associated with a book detail table, you might have an object which has an author and a book detail property, which you can add or remove as you see fit, as is appropriate for your data. And so because there's a different underlying data structure, obviously the way that you interact with this, with this data format with JSON is different. And today we're specifically going to be talking about a cloud provider for JSON storage, MongoDB, but this is applicable to kind of these concepts. Next few concepts we're going to be talking about are applicable to kind of all usages of JSON data. The API on top of JSON data is going to look slightly different compared to a SQL API that you would use on top of a MySQL database, for example, on top of single source MySQL wire compatible protocol. Because you kind of store by objects which have properties, you might be using like a dot find to search for an object that matches a first name property instead of selecting from a kind of joined table, as you might see in these two different examples. Because we have these different APIs to access JSON data, we also have different methods of performing analytics on JSON data. And so for those of you familiar with Mongo Atlas or have just done analytics on top of JSON data, you'll understand this concept of aggregation pipelines, right? And aggregation pipelines are essentially kind of a way to kind of collate your JSON data that you'd like to frequently perform analytical queries over, and kind of store the results of that collation, right? And so kind of frequent challenge that people run into with JSON data, and especially running analytics on JSON data on top of MongoDB, is that it's quite difficult to do this task because you have a very flexible schema. The way the underlying database manages these properties and indexes these properties, your analytical queries on MongoDB data end up being orders of magnitude slower than you might find on just a local SQL database, or if you've used kind of a memory first SQL database, you're going to find that your analytical queries are running orders of magnitude slower. You're going to find that dashboards are hanging. You're going to find that queries kind of take a frustrating amount of time, and you really can't power real-time applications on top of just vanilla JSON data. For kind of just standing up a really kind of proof of concept database, maybe just for spinning up your first, you're spinning up an application that's only going to have a few users. Maybe you find that JSON data or using a JSON data format is really flexible and it helps you kind of iterate faster. But as you kind of run into these scaling issues, as we see in a lot of our customers, you're going to find that analytical queries on top of MongoDB data are going to be increasingly difficult. And so, we see a number of different workarounds that people use to power analytics on top of Mongo and other JSON-based applications. Kind of very, very frequently, we see, data is, we see people build data pipelines between Mongo and, relational database, kind of like SingleStore or Snowflake or Rockset, and kind of you have to create these often fragile pipelines that rely on the existence of certain properties to kind of do any sort of interesting analytical work on your JSON data. And this is obviously very time consuming. It's fragile, as I mentioned earlier, because things can break because of additional properties or missing properties or properties that have required fields. And so this is kind of a difficult problem to kind of get around. And so that's why at SingleStore we've built SingleStore Kai, which is an API that sits on top of your SingleStore database and converts all of your Mongo API queries to SQL under the hood, which then run on SingleStore. And so what is SingleStore? SingleStore is a unified distributed database for both transactional and analytical queries. And what that means is that, you know, um, both inserting and reading out of SingleStore are crazy fast, on the order of milliseconds of latency for petabytes of data, for kind of enterprise scale applications. And so what we see is up to 100 times faster analytics, zero code changes, zero data transformations. You can use all of your existing Mongo tools and drivers to kind of, and there's kind of very minimal work needed to transfer to SingleStore Kai. And you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get to use, NoSQL, the flexibility of NoSQL, the flexibility of starting with no schema in NoSQL, but also the kind of reliability and the stability of SQL. And so a few other technologies that we're going to be using today in our demo, we're going to be using Vercel to deploy our full stack application built on JSON data using SingleStore Kai. So Vercel, for those that are unfamiliar, is it's a deployment platform for web applications. There's kind of built-in tools for performance monitoring and optimization, but really the reason we're using it is because it's just very simple to get a full stack application up and running and available to be seen and used by your users. We're also going to be using Prisma. Prisma is a JavaScript library or TypeScript library, which provides an object relation management system for your database. And so Prisma natively supports MongoDB and kind of provides that JSON query API on top of your Mongo database that we mentioned earlier. And it allows you to basically interact with your database as an object. You can kind of use dot notation to, kind of zoom in on the properties and the kind of objects that you're interested in, or the instances of objects that you're interested in. And then you can also define, schemas and migrations in code for when you use Prisma with, kind of a more traditional relational database or Mongo database. Great. So I just talked a lot, and I know kind of people are probably itching to see how all of this fits together. So before I do anything, let me see. I will try to share this link out in the chat. Let's see. Oh, Yukti, it looks like I can't send the message to everyone, but do you think you could resend this message that I just sent in the webinar chat to all the attendees?
This
So
is the link to your notebook, right?
this is a link to a live demo that I'll be kind of
All
walking
right.
through the code for.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll go ahead and share so that people can also kind of follow along here. Let's see. Okay, great. Great. Okay. So this is the app that we're going to be kind of stepping through the code for today. This is a pretty basic kind of personal blog full stack example with a backend that handles new posts and new authors, while the front end kind of works on just displaying these posts and also displaying profile pages for specific authors. So already, for those of us that are familiar with, JSON data formats, you maybe have already mapped out like how the kind of data structure or schema for this might look like. But just to ground everyone in the example that we're working with today, essentially in this app, you can sign up, you can the a paying test, singlestore.com, you can sign up. And then once you've signed up, you can create a draft under your name. And then you can see, your drafts and then publish them. And then I have a different profile under the same name, but you can, kind of click the names of authors to see their associated posts. Right? So pretty simple example, but hopefully, this kind of gets everyone's brains churning about how, you could potentially use SingleStore Kai to kind of power some of your JSON applications, power some of your JSON analytics. How do you actually put all of this together? So first, you're obviously going to need a database instance. And so you're going to want to go to singlestore.com/cloud trial to sign up for our free shared tier. And signing up for this free shared tier gets you a one single store instance on AWS, which is free forever, and immediately allows you to start building on top of SingleStore, not just SingleStore Kai, but to use SingleStore's kind of industry or class leading, query and transactional capabilities. And so you just kind of sign up here, but you'll see that I'm already signed in. And then once you're in the SingleStore portal, you want to go to deployments, and we kind of already full on workspaces here, but you'll want to click create workspace. And then from create workspace, you can create your first free shared tier workspace. And then the wizard is pretty good at kind of leading you through the different steps to create your first workspace. But once you have your first workspace, which will show up here on this left, kind of left-hand column and workspaces, you'll want to go to your settings and enable SingleStore Kai, which gives you access to the SingleStore MongoDB API, or gives you access to the MongoDB API, which will sit on top of your SingleStore database. And then once you have SingleStore Kai enabled, you'll want to go to connect and then click MongoDB client to get the SingleStore Kai connection URI, which actually allows your application to kind of talk to your database. Once you have that, and the first time you kind of pull up this window, it'll show you your password, but since I've already done that, it's not showing it. Once you have that and your password, you're kind of all set to deploy your first full stack application on MongoDB data over SingleStore Kai. So we'll just head over to my GitHub here. And from this GitHub, you can kind of see all of our code. You can see all the code that we're going to be walking through today. I believe it has already been shared out in the chat. But the kind of important thing to notice here is there's this really simple deploy button on the GitHub repository, which lets you deploy an instance of this project. So you can clone it, or you can fork it, and then deploy kind of your own project to get started, or just to get kind of CRUD querying capabilities on top of SingleStore. But once you've deployed it, you're going to want to make sure to, let's see. Once you've deployed it, kind of from Vercel, inside the Vercel portal, obviously you'll need to kind of sign up for Vercel, but Vercel also has a free tier. So all of the steps that I'm showing you today are completely free. Once you're inside of Vercel and you're inside your project, you'll want to take your MongoDB URI from your SingleStore portal, and you'll want to make sure that that's sitting inside of your environment variables in your project. And that's just so that, and you'll want to store that under, I believe we have it called just database URL. And that's just so that your application can actually talk to your database and kind of both read and write to your database. Great. Let's start stepping through the code. We are doing pretty well on time. Here. VS Code. All right, great. Great. So hopefully everyone got a good sense of what the kind of underlying layout of the application looks like. And you can obviously also follow along through the application as we kind of go through the different components of the code that are relevant here. But we're using Vercel to deploy our application, but the kind of underlying library that talks to our database for us is this library that I mentioned earlier called Prisma. And essentially, Prisma will so when you use this, so essentially Prisma will allow us to work with our database in code, kind of manage, allow us to obviously query and read and write from our database in code, and I'll show that in just a second. But really importantly, it allows you to kind of initialize your database and also pull existing database schemas into your code repository so that one, the library understands the concept of the different kind of object schemas within your application, and then two, so that you can track those changes in your kind of version control software. So we have an existing schema which we've already provided for you inside of inside of the GitHub repo. This schema, I'll just point out, has a few important quirks because SingleStore still does not quite yet have 100% compatibility with Prisma. The kind of, you'll see the two models here have they have a very kind of peculiar index name named shard key. And this is actually quite important to include inside of your Prisma schema, as SingleStore has this concept of shard keys in our database, which are essentially the way by which we distribute your data across your different nodes so that your data, when accessed, is accessed in the kind of quickest way possible. So this shard key index is very important to include. Kind of everything else, you'll see the kind of the IDs, the properties like created at, updated at, content published. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to change this provider name here. I was just doing some changes earlier and it was on MySQL, but the provider name should actually be MongoDB. But the rest of these properties can be customized for your own application. But once you have this schema, I'm not going to run this quite yet because I don't have all the environment variables set up on my local environment. But once you have your own, SingleStore instance and you've set up your environment variables inside of an environment variable file, you will be able to run. Let's see, I believe it is npm prisma db push, and running this command inside of your well, you'll want to npm install first, but after npm install, you'll want to run npm prisma db push, and that basically pushes this schema, which you would have customized to your kind of liking, to your SingleStore database, and then you can kind of see what that schema will look like inside of SingleStore, and I'll show everyone here. So inside of SingleStore, after you pushed, your data will look kind of like this. You'll have a post table and you'll have a user table, very much like, or exactly like the post and user table that we've defined inside of our Prisma schema. And you'll see there's an interesting way that we end up storing the JSON data inside of SingleStore, because SingleStore kind of at its core is a relational database, but we provide an API on top of it to allow for compatibility with JSON objects. We have an ID field, obviously, but we also have this _more field, which is a field that contains all the other properties that we've defined before. So there's some kind of unsupported characters here, but hopefully everyone can see, created at, updated at, title, and so on. And this is from the post table. So you can kind of see the different posts that were already created before. And then obviously as well, we have the user table here. And we can see this user that we just created, a ping test, is obviously reflected in our database. And we can see, how to read and write from our database. And now I'm actually going to step into the JavaScript code that shows how Prisma actually interacts with our database. So great. So we find a schema, we push the schema to our database, and now we want to actually be able to, interact with our database. And so the kind of the details of how the exact backend works is obviously agnostic to, the kind of different applications that you're trying to deploy. But if you're using Prisma, and also if you're just using the Mongo API, you'll find that the syntax is very similar. So just for posts, you can kind of see what we do I guess we'll start with authors, because authors are kind of connected to every post. Let's see here. So when we sign up as an author, we can kind of see we have, this front end code that kind of catches the data that the user types into the field, the name and the email. And then we end up submitting that we end up passing that to the backend as a JSON object. And what we end up doing is the kind of actual API call that creates the user in our database is super simple. It's just prisma.user, and that user is the user in the schema that we defined here. Prisma.user.create, and then we just very simply pass along the body JSON object that is given to us from the front end. And so that creates users for us. And then when we want to post, when we want to post, as everyone saw in the kind of post page, you set your, the title of your post, the author's email, the content of your post, and then you submit it. And then that's obviously also passed to your backend in the body property of inside the body property of this object. And so posting is very similar. What we're going to do is we're going to actually first find the author name associated with our author email. And for those of us that are used to kind of foreign keys, I'll explain why we need to do that in just a second. But we find the author name associated with our author email, and then we create the kind of accompanying post. And that's, again, the same prisma.post.create. And then, except in this case, we're just going to be creating from the creating using the post schema. And that's just going to be passing along, the title and content, and then obviously also the user, which is associated with the post. Great. So that kind of gets us the very basic functionality. I realize I've been talking now like for 30 minutes straight, and so I want to get into a few of the questions. Before I do that, though, I wanted to very quickly address this kind of why we needed to use find first. And so the reason for that is actually SingleStore's underlying database does not support, for those of you who are familiar with kind of the relational database world, there's this concept of foreign keys, which links different tables together. SingleStore does not actually support foreign key constraints. And so what we need to do instead is we need to move the the joining or the matching of posts to users. We need to move that to the application level. And thankfully, using Prisma or an object relation management software or library makes that very simple, where it's just kind of one extra API call where you're just finding the first author that matches the author email. And as hopefully everyone can see in the application, the way that ends up working, it's very snappy, and it kind of runs all on top of SingleStore's Kai API. Great. So Akmal, I know you've been looking at the questions so far. Anything that stands out or anything that I missed while we still have a good chunk of time?
Yeah, Alex, I think there was a question there. Let me just try and find it. Yes, so WebAv had a question about sharding at the infra level. And so my take on this was that typically database sharding, yes, is typically handled at the infrastructure level rather than at the application level. I mean, a SingleStore kind of manages that for you, or you can provide some details as you're creating the table as well. But then I think his observation was that why have you included it at the application level? I only have some thoughts on that. Maybe just for simplicity, I just kind of guessed, but perhaps my guess is wrong.
Yeah. So really good question. The reason that we end up having to specify the shard key inside of the Prisma schema is that the shard key is actually a required column in all SingleStore databases, I believe. And so what Prisma does is it basically tries to reflect the underlying structure of your database in code in a .prisma file in your repo. And so that's the reason why kind of on the application level, you see the shard key defined. But really it's just kind of for bookkeeping for Prisma so that it knows the underlying, the underlying structure of your database. And it allows for you to both push and pull from your database. And pushing and pulling from your database is not the same as, I realize it's a little confusing, not the same as reading or writing from your database, but instead it's grabbing the current schema of your database and also applying migrations to your database from Prisma if you make changes to your schema inside of your Prisma schema.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because I just remembered recently I was using OpenAI's Whisper, the free GitHub version. And so that works quite well with SingleStore if you're just using like a MySQL driver. But it does give you warnings about columns that it doesn't recognize, that a shard key comes up. So it still works, but it kind of warns you that there's something it doesn't recognize. So in your case, what you've done, you've provided that specific information to it simply because it is a requirement of the SingleStore itself, and therefore to get it to work properly, it has to know about that information. So yeah.
Yeah, and I actually, sorry,
yeah. No, go ahead.
I realized that I actually shared completely the wrong .prisma file. I'm gonna just do a little quick correction here. And so I forget the name of the person that called out the shard key thing, but they're actually completely on the nose. You don't actually need a shard key for Mongo. That's just because I was doing some local testing for the MySQL compatibility layer for Prisma. But the .prisma schema inside of the GitHub repo that's been shared with everyone should be the correct Prisma schema, and that does not include the shard key. That just has this concept of or mark this. It just marks every kind of ID field as a database.object ID. It marks that with that property, and that's what Mongo needs to kind of delineate each object. So this is the correct schema that you'll want to use for the application that we just showed. It's all the same properties, but there's a few differences. Most importantly, there's not a shard key index, and so everything I just said about shard keys, that applies for the SingleStore MySQL compatibility layer, but it does not apply here. So apologies
So
there.
Kai doesn't need it because MongoDB doesn't need it. So it works the same way.
Yeah, that's right.
Gotcha. That makes sense, yes. Because I think we're trying to offer as much compatibility with MongoDB as possible, and therefore, if attendees, users are building apps on MongoDB and thinking about perhaps using SingleStore instead for the analytics, which you mentioned, it's much more superior on. And I think we've got somewhere on the blog site, there was Jason, who was the director for the Kai development. He published something, I think it was last year. Some of the analytics queries he was running up to 1,000x faster, something like that. So really, really, incredible for performance for some types of analytics queries. I didn't see anything else in particular, Alex, unless you want to sort of scroll through. There's a question there from Ashish. It just came up. So he's just asking about authentication and DB integration.
Authentication and DB integration. User opens up landing page, sign up record is created. Okay, so good question. This is so authentication is a little bit outside of the scope of this webinar. So kind of the sign up flow that you saw that I showed just at first is obviously not secure. It's not not any sort of production grade authentication that you should use. I mean, it doesn't even use a password. It just kind of specify, or you just specify like a name and an email address, and then anyone can create any post as long as you know the email address. Obviously, it's not going to be secure for production grade application, and for authentication, you're going to want to kind of look into enterprise grade authentication solution. I don't believe SingleStore yet has built-in authentication, but yeah, good question. This is a kind of a proof of concept. You should not use it to inform how you design your authentication in your application.
I think it's just worth adding there, Alex, that with the free sign up, so if, for example, people are using the free shared tier, you'll get that connection link, and certainly from the SingleStore side, and I haven't checked on the Kai side, but you get a certificate, a PEM file that you can download, and that adds a bit more security in addition to kind of username and password. So that's a much more secure way of connecting. But like I said, I don't know what the equivalent is on the MongoDB side, whether we provide anything or if it just follows the MongoDB practice in terms of, provide the details of the cluster, the primary, the secondaries, whatever, and the username and the password. So good question. Yes, worth investigating and checking that out on our side.
Yeah, for database level authentication, we didn't get to see this explicitly, but what you get when you sign up for your first workspace and then spin up your first database instance is once you click that connect tab and you go in, the first time you open it, you'll see it'll show your password, and then that'll be the only time that you get to see your password. So you want to make sure to write that down or save it somewhere safe. Otherwise, you'll have to go in and reset the password. But that's how you actually authenticate your application, which is talking to your database. For application level authentication, like for users and so on, that's sort of outside of the scope of this webinar. But yeah, this is again kind of a proof of concept to show how you can use SingleStore Kai with an existing JSON application or to build a new JSON application. Okay, so let's see. It doesn't look like we have many other questions. This is actually a complete first. Usually we have tons and tons of questions, and I spend like the rest of the time answering questions. But let's see. Yeah, I mean, again, the schema that I showed earlier, and I'll just show that again to everyone, the incorrect schema, so that people know this one is not the correct schema, actually, and you're going to want to use um, this schema, which is correct inside of the GitHub database, or the GitHub repo, sorry. And I believe everything should just be working out of the box if you just clone the repo, and you can kind of get up and running. Akmal, any steps that I missed? I know I
No,
went pretty
I think
quickly for the first like 15 minutes.
yeah. Yeah, I think Alex, you showed briefly. You showed your GitHub repo, didn't you? You showed the page, and I did see the set of instructions, kind of step by step. Do this, do this, do this. So I think as long as someone follows those steps, you should be able to reproduce exactly what you've shown them. So I think that's exactly spot on. Only other thing I would say, and I didn't see this being asked today. Sometimes we get this asked. People kind of wonder, what's the level of compatibility that Kai provides with MongoDB? And I think in the industry, I mean, there are other companies that do similar sorts of products. You may know a few of them, but I believe our level of compatibility is very high. There is a compatibility test out there as well that you can run, and it comes, SingleStore comes up very highly on that. And just as a quick example, kind of 30-second example. So recently, MongoDB did a webinar. I mean, this was focusing on kind of Gen AI stuff. And I took the opportunity just to download their Jupyter notebook. I was curious to see, how easy I could get that working with SingleStore. And I think it was literally like just a couple of lines and some minor tweaks and changes. And the rest of the code was exactly the same, and it worked fine with SingleStore. And that's good because, if people are interested in perhaps either keeping Mongo as their primary transactional database and then using SingleStore for analytics in the short run, and then maybe if they like SingleStore for the analytics, perhaps looking at SingleStore for the transactional part as well, the moving everything across, then this is a good way to kind of test it. Keep your existing investment, try out the water, test the water, see how good SingleStore is, and then move things across. And we make that process, I wouldn't say 100% pain-free, but it's almost there. We make that process because of the high level of compatibility that we provide with Mongo. It makes the lives of people, much easier. And we do have customers who have made that change, made that switch from Mongo to Kai.
Yeah, I will say, just to like hit on that point a little more. I've been working on getting SingleStore to work with Prisma for a little while. And so actually trying to use the SingleStore Mongo compatibility API using SingleStore Kai with Prisma turned out to work like basically as well as just all the kind of custom kind of integration stuff that I had to work on to get the MySQL compatibility layer to talk to SingleStore. So just kind of another example to add on there. Getting even something as complex as an ORM to talk to SingleStore was almost as simple as just changing the, I'll show everyone here, like changing the data source provider name to MongoDB. So like everyone can kind of see there's obviously some kind of, there's some MySQL specific properties and kind of, yeah, MySQL specific properties here, but just changing to MongoDB, like, and then everyone can hopefully kind of compare like the actual schema differences between this MySQL schema and then the Mongo schema. It's a very minimal change. So SingleStore Kai is a really great way if you're using, if you're already on top of, if you're already using like Prisma and you want to try out, a JSON data format because you'd like to be more flexible with your schema, that's a great way to do it. Or if you're already on Mongo and you'd like to switch over and you just kind of need an example of how kind of quick and easy and simple it is to switch over. In this case, it's switching your provider, but the kind of Mongo API or the Mongo API URI is completely kind of cross-compatible with, or almost completely cross-compatible with kind of other Mongo drivers and connectors. And so you kind of, what we've seen a lot of people do is they just go into their environment file, like just switch out the URI, and oftentimes everything just works right out of the box with very minimal changes needed. So great. Doesn't look like we have more questions.
So if we don't have more questions, we can just close it up, right? Like we can always close it up early.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you can just share your screen once more. So for whoever that joined late, we have amazing sessions that are coming up. So tomorrow with Akmal, as you may know, that we are presenting Intro to Vectors. It will be a very beginner friendly workshop. So if you're interested, feel free to join in. And the links to everything is there in the chat. Alex, can you please share your screen with the presentation and the Q&A?
Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Completely, sorry. I had it
It's
on
all
this
right.
slide, but
So
I forgot I was sharing the wrong.
it's all right. So yeah, and then on September 13th, it's like a topic that we are bringing back on special request. It's called LLMs in fraud detection. So Akmal, again, thanks again for doing these two topics with us. So, and on 20th, we are presenting how to use SingleStore for auto scaling. So this is a webinar that will be done by Maika Bhakti. He is a PM here, and he is really good when it comes to demonstrating SingleStore's capabilities for auto scaling. So, Alex, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that SingleStore actually scales its memory usage according to your how the data flows in according to the real time use, right? I hope I'm right. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So I think it will be based on this, right? So you're on mute.
Oh, yes, that's
Yeah.
that's right. I don't know the exact contents of the presentation, but yeah, SingleStore does scale your
Yeah.
memory disk and compute usage based on
Yeah.
the
So
kind of yeah.
So based on this, we have actually helped customers save a lot of dollars when it comes to compute costs. So Micah has been phenomenal in like developing this thing. So he was in charge. So he's also agreed to do this webinar with us. And so this has been rescheduled multiple times. So feel free to chime in, because these sessions are always recorded, and we will send you the recording afterwards the session. And today's session will also have a follow-up email with Alex's notebook and the link to the demo. So stay tuned for that. And we actually had an issue with selecting the raffle winner because it's like a random draw. So I will be announcing 2 raffle winners by the end of the day for those who joined late. Can you please go to the next slide? Yeah, it's right there on your screen. So we actually announced a raffle that was there in the beginning of the session. So if you tried out SingleStore's notebooks, so during the webinar with Alex's notebook, and which I put in the chat, and followed along maybe, or maybe just created an account, you are eligible to be entered and have a chance to win Meta's new Ray-Ban LLM smart glasses or branded new AirPods. So simply click the link that's present on your screen, or you can just scan the QR code. I will be putting everything in the chat again for your convenience, and just scan, and it will directly take you to the landing page. Just takes 10 seconds and be eligible and be entered to win. If you have any other questions, you can always reach out to us at team@singlestore.com. So yeah, I think we can conclude today's session, and thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Akmal. Thanks, Alex, for joining, and thanks to all the attendees. Have a great rest of the day and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.